All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Bob Parsons. I'm a professor in civil, environmental, and architectural engineering, and I'm also Director of Facilities and Special Projects for the School of Engineering. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first of two Career Accelerator lectures that we're hosting this fall for your benefit. The Career Accelerator Lecture Series was started on an initiative by the Engineering Advisory Board a couple of years ago. They were looking for ways to help you get exposure to folks that have already been through this process, that have had successful careers and done interesting and exciting things, and to help you get a better start on your own career and learn some things that you won't necessarily come across in the class. So that's what this series is about, and we've been very lucky to have many, many wonderful people come in and speak to us about their experiences and what they've learned. We are pleased to have Kerm Campbell with us. Kerm graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from KU in 1960, followed by a Master of Science degree from MIT. He served for 32 years at Dow Corning in Michigan, the United Kingdom, and Belgium. While with Dow Corning, he helped develop trade relations for the company in the former Soviet Union and China. He later served as CEO of Herman Miller before becoming an entrepreneur and starting Blackstar Farms in 1998, which produces premium wines and resort and culinary programs. While at KU, he spent a great deal of time, not just in engineering, but at the School of Music, and this had a significant impact on his life, which he will share with us on that as well. Kerm will speak about how developing an understanding of geography and a variety of cultures and developing a broad set of interests can pave the way for serving many people and advancing the common good. So, looking forward to that. Thank you for coming. So the way this is going to work, Kerm's going to go and he's going to talk, but he wants questions as we go. So if you have questions about anything he's talking about, then just pipe up, including online. And we're looking for a discussion. I think Kerm is looking for a discussion more than a lecture.
Correct.
So with that, Kerm, take it away.
Great. Wonderful to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about what's led me to what I consider to be a very, very interesting life. I graduated, as I was just told, you just heard, I graduated in 1960, which makes me older than most of your grandparents. But I attribute much of my vitality and hopefully more youthful looking than my almost 84 years would lead you to believe. And that's really what I want to talk with you about today, is how you can, even if you are 100% sold out on being a scientist or an engineer or whatever that you're pursuing, I'd like you to introduce to you a thought that maybe you could find room in your heart for some of your activity and some of your thinking and some of how you spend your time in many, many other pursuits other than in the skill that you've learned to master and hope to master at KU. And I have no qualms about telling you that if you can open your heart as well as your mind, that you will not only have a more successful career, but you will have a much more successful life. And that's what I want to coach you on today, is your life, not about your profession. Because your faculty and everybody that you come in contact with on a daily basis while you're at the university is doing wonders to help you excel at your skill. But I'd like to kind of lead you in a different direction, to think about the other side of whoever you are. I've seen, I don't know whether you know Allie, I can't remember her last name, but I was here several weeks ago, and I heard Allie stand up and start talking about what she had done during a summer program that I was able to extend to 5 students who wanted to basically take their passion and work on it as well as basically experience growth in their whole life. And when Allie stood up to speak about what her passion was, it was very difficult for her to begin with, because she was nervous, which not anything wrong with being nervous, but she was nervous to the point where she was more or less debilitated. But then as she started talking about her passion, and her passion was cooking, had nothing to do with engineering, but her passion was cooking, then she immediately started loosening up, and people who had been almost feeling sorry for her when she started speaking, then they came forward on their chairs. There were about 35 people in the room. And then when she really got to where she really wanted to go, she wasn't talking just about cooking, but she was talking about the chemistry and everything around the chemistry of baking a loaf of bread, making and baking a loaf of bread. And people just came alive because she was so convincing and so much at ease. When she finished, everybody applauded, almost a standing O, you know. And I, shortly after that, when I was talking with she and several other people that I had been working, financing through their passion for the summer, I said that Allie is now my poster child, because she demonstrated everything that I'm hoping will happen and can happen to everybody. Because you don't need to be nervous. You don't need to be just thinking that the world will come to you if you are the best scientist or the best engineer. And probably some people will come to you, but not the world. The world will come to you because you're speaking from your heart and you're acting from your heart. And that's what I want to really talk with you. You're at a very critical stage in your careers. And if you can open your heart to allow things to come in, that's very easy for me, because when I was on the campus 100 years ago, I not only studied chemical engineering, but I spent probably almost half of my time in the School of Music, because I'm an operatic tenor. I love to sing in the chorale. I took voice lessons. I played French horn in the marching band and in the concert band, and I basically just love music. And loving music opened my mind. Of course, it didn't just start with KU, because I'd been singing all my life. But the ability to stand in front of people, and not just later on, when I was well into my career, I did a lot of Broadway shows, not on Broadway, but community theater, and it was so easy for me to project what I really felt. And so when I played, for instance, Charlie Dalrymple, who was the lead tenor, the character lead tenor in Brigadoon, it just came alive, because I have a high, crystal clear, and I'm not bragging, but I do, a tenor voice. And so when I sang in Brigadoon, you know, people just fell in love with my voice. And that doesn't have to be your voice or anything else, but it needs to be something that you can say, this is not part of my trade, this is part of who I really want to be. So I'd like to leave that thought with you, and then just talk to you about where I've been. And let me start about when I was at KU. I told you a bit about where I spent a lot of my time, and probably would have done better in chemical engineering if I had not have spent so much time in the School of Music. But I wouldn't have traded that time in the School of Music for anything, because when the Dow Corning came to the campus with 2 other people, I didn't have the best GPA. But when I joined Dow Corning, and when the people that came to campus saw who I was, they knew immediately where I belonged. And that was doing technical things, but in front of customers. And so my path through the company, I was getting new jobs about every 18 months because the company saw the potential that I had and was trying to broaden me. And then when I moved to Europe, took my family there, then things really started opening up. And while I was there, within the first year I was in Europe, I spent the time in South Wales, just south of Cardiff, Wales, basically educating a company that had Dow Corning technology, but was only a minority. Dow Corning only had a minority interest in them. And when Dow Corning acquired the whole company, because the other company went bankrupt, then I was asked to go over there and introduce that new company that had several thousand employees spread not only in South Wales, but around Europe. And here I was, a youngster almost over there, and I felt very comfortable doing what I do best, and that's basically being in front of people. And then a year later, I was made head of all technology for Dow Corning in Europe, and then I started traveling well beyond the confines of what I had been doing. And when I went to the Soviet Union, shortly after I arrived in Brussels, I started developing a relationship. And I want to tell you a little story about who I developed the relationship with. Because when I went over there, this 1973 was when probably closer, let's just 1972, I started going to the Soviet Union. And the people in the Soviet Union were open to what I had to say, but they assigned a young man about my age from the KGB to basically keep track of me, and he and I became fast friends. And because we were together so much, because he would come and pick me up at my hotel and take me to wherever my meetings were, and he might sit in on the meetings or he might not, but he was basically there to watch this guy, because at that time the United States and the Soviet Union weren't even talking. I mean, we were bitter enemies, and here I was just putting myself out on the firing line and enjoying every minute of it. And my wife, who I met when shortly after I arrived at Dow Corning in Midland, and I've always felt that was the main reason that the God above took me to Midland, Michigan, because he had placed Sally Deisterhoff there about 6 months before I arrived. And within a year and a half, we were married and starting our family. But at any rate, when I would go to the Soviet Union, I just felt very comfortable and never thought twice about what I said, never worried about it, and never once did anybody ever say, "You're going too fast, bud. You're getting out over your skis." And I think that happened because I was so genuine in projecting myself, and I never talked about that they had a crazy system, which they did. And the fact, on my first trip to the Soviet Union, I went back to Brussels and I spoke with the president of Dow Corning in Europe, and I was kind of downloading what had happened, and I said, "This system is unbelievable, unbelievably bad. I said, the men are so out of touch that most of them are drunk by early afternoon, and the people really running the country are elderly women who hate everything that they have to do, and they hate everybody they come in contact with, including me. And I said, this system can't last 20 years. It failed in 17 years. And then when it failed, then things started opening up in a different way. So, but when I left on my very last trip to the Soviet Union, before I moved back to, I moved to Boston to be at the Sloan School for a year. I took my wife Sally with me just so she could experience what I had been telling her about in the 4 years I had been going there. And when you know, she was uptight about it, because everything that could have gone wrong seemed to be going wrong on the trip. But I just kept telling her to relax, things are going to be fine. And the last day that I was with this young KGB guy, he said, tomorrow when I come to pick you up, I'm going to be driving the van that you see. And he said, I want you to watch for it, because I've got something, I'll have something in the van that I want to give you, and I don't want to bring it into the hotel. And that's all he said. And so I saw him drive in, and I went out to meet him, and he opened the side of it was like a VW microvan or something, opened the side of it and took out a bunch of newspapers, and he started unfolding them. And finally he came to the nugget that was inside of the thing, and he unwrapped it and showed it to me. And it was an icon, a brass icon about that big, total solid brass. And he said, I can't take this, because it was hundreds of years old. And he said, it's been in my family for 4 generations. But I want you to have it, because I know how important your faith is to you. And we had never talked about my faith. But he picked it up just by the talking. And so I reluctantly took it, and I was a little bit concerned that I could have been set up for it, but I got it out of the country, and I had it framed, and it's in my home right now, still. But my dear wife was scared to death, because I had put it inside of the lining of her suitcase. And when we left, we were in Moscow when he gave it to me, and then we flew to Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg again, and she was convinced that since it was in her suitcase that she would end up in Siberia. But when the luggage went down the chute, then she could relax. But I have got to thinking later that I think that my KGB friend was a closet Christian, and he wanted to get that. They had been hiding that, because if they would have been found, by law they had to be belted down. Anything of that nature had to be destroyed in the dark days of the Soviet Union. And his family had been able to, as he told me, keep it for 4 generations. And somehow had it hidden. And I think he saw, since I was leaving, that I would be careful enough. He didn't tell me anything about hide it or anything else. He said, I want this. I basically said, I want you to have this, because I know how important your faith is. See, and therein lies the secret of being yourself. Because I didn't ever talk with him about Christianity or about my faith or anything else, which was very real. But he knew just from being around me, and maybe he wanted to know, because perhaps he and his family were closet Christians. And we know, we learned over the years that millions of closet Christians in the People's Republic of China and in the Soviet Union, but they just had to keep a low profile. So at any rate, you'll never know what's coming next. But if you're true to your beliefs, and I'm not saying that you have to be a Christian or anything else, but you're true to what your heart says, then I would encourage you to listen to it and to step out and let your heart take over and try it in different ways and just see if it doesn't make a difference in your life. And so at any rate, I just can't tell you enough that I think there's so much to be gained by opening up your heart and just not let everything be handled by your head. We know that we have a right brain and a left brain. And the left brain, when it's dominant, sometimes doesn't have time to mess around with the right brain. I'm just telling you, don't let that happen. Don't let that happen. And you don't have to become an opera singer, and you don't have to play in Brigadoon. But as Allie found out, all you have to really do is talk about a loaf of bread. Making a loaf of bread, because that's what her passion is. And she was spectacular once she started speaking about her passion. And you all, I'm sure, I don't care what you do, if it's stamp collecting or whatever it might be, play it out and let it take over part of your thought process. Let your heart work for a while. Sometimes your heart will get lonely if your head is getting all of the interest. So that's just a sort of a sideline, but I think it's so important for all of you, in person as well as those of you online, to think about, how much at ease am I being just a scientist or just an engineer. I have seen some brilliant people basically freeze. And I don't like to see people freeze. I like to, and if you learn how to control those emotions by opening up your heart to something that you love to do, then it's going to affect everything you do. And you'll find that it's easier for you to give a speech on a technical subject, just because there's really the interest comes from the things that almost are unsaid, because you need to feel what you're talking about, not just learn it. You need to feel it. So I've probably beat that horse to death now. So I think it was probably a dead horse already, but I really feel strongly about that. And I feel that the time that I spent, I'll just say across the road, I'm not sure where the School of Music was in 1960, but the time that I spent there, I would not have replaced that. I'm almost 100% certain that I would not have ended up at Dow Corning. And that's an unbelievable penalty for me, because then I would have never met Sally Dijsterhoff. And that was the greatest thing that ever happened in my life, was to meet my dear wife. And I'm coming up to a horrible anniversary on October 1st, which is just a few days ahead. It marks 5 years since she passed away. And she carried MS with her half of her life, but she was a saint, and she influenced so many people, and particularly her husband and her children. And I can't imagine life without Sally, and I don't know what I would have done without her. So you just think about your passions and let your guard down, if that's what it takes, and let your heart take over. It doesn't have to be dominant, as it was with me. Pretty much my dominant side was that soft side, the right brain. But yours, if you let yourself open up 10 or 15% of the time to those inner feelings and learn what you need to do with that inner feeling. You don't have to turn it into something that you can measure. In fact, you don't want to measure it. You can't measure what's happening in your heart. You can feel it, and the people can see it, but you can't measure it. And because if you try to measure it, as so many of us who are technically trained try to measure things, then we'll shut it off because we have to let it flow. And so probably enough on that. But then when I came back to, after I finished at MIT, I went back to Midland and spent a couple of years running some of the technology for the whole company. And then in 1979, the People's Republic of China, you may not know this, but in 1979, it was announced that after basically being totally out of touch with the world, with the free world, from the early 40s, or maybe even earlier than that, the People's Republic of China had basically been locked out. They locked themselves out. But in 1979, an announcement was made that was changing. And so in 1980, Kerm Campbell was over there knocking on doors. And I spent 2 weeks giving lectures around in various places, and then developed a wonderful relationship with many of the people that had come from all over China to sit down with me. Two years later, then we entertained some of those people to come to Midland and meet with us in Midland. And then in 2 years later, in 1982, I went back and spent a wonderful 2 weeks, basically just sort of refreshing things and hyping what I had started. And it was amazing how well I was received. I did have one very awkward moment, and I tell you this just because what I'm suggesting won't necessarily be that easy for you. I was sitting with a very high official, Chinese official in Beijing, and he had put on a wonderful banquet for me, and I was seated next to him at the head of the table. And at the end of the meal, he proposed a toast to me, and he explained to me, he spoke very good English, he explained to me that he was basically giving me the highest honor he could by serving me with something that I jokingly later called duck brain on the half bill. And imagine taking a duck's head and slicing it this way, and then opening it up and taking the brain out, and I guess it was cooked, I don't know, and then offering it to me as their guest of honor. And I thought, now what am I going to do? I've eaten everything, but I am not going to eat duck brain on the half bill. And so my mind was racing, and finally I said, I can't eat this because it's too wonderful. I insist that you eat it. And he resisted, but then he ate it and enjoyed it. And it was the only way I could try to save some face. And I have no idea what he might have said afterwards, and nor did I need to know. But I'm just telling you, sometimes when you take a step out, there may not be any solid earth to step on. And I really felt that when I was in Beijing. But there's just so much good that comes by opening yourself up. So anybody have any questions? Is there anything that you think I'm crazy or what? Anybody online have a question?
I'm interested in how music impacted your engineering, or if any. Is there overlap between music and engineering, or engineering and music and mathematics?
Well, I don't think it necessarily impacted the engineering, but it impacted my job which I needed an engineering background to converse with customers and other people who were in the laboratories that I had charge of. But I would have never accelerated through the company the way I did without having the gift of gab, basically. And I'm very, very much at ease, not only in front of customers, but I just enjoy speaking offline. And so it had an enormous impact on my career. And it wasn't too many years after I started at Dow Corning that I was running a very significant part of the company. And some brilliant chemical engineers from Minnesota and Purdue and Michigan State and University of Michigan and on and on and on, I left them in the dust. So and I didn't do it because I was trying to get ahead of them, but I was doing what I knew needed to be done.
Chemical engineering to designing some really cool chairs. How did that transition take place? Did they go after you? Is that something you had interest in? Why that trajectory?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I left for, in fact, that's a great question. And the day after I joined Herman Miller, there was I'll call him a smart-aleck young reporter from the Grand Rapids Press that came out to interview me. And at just the appropriate time in his interview with me, he said, "What do you know about furniture?" And I said, "I don't know anything about furniture. I had nothing about furniture, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I know a lot about leadership." And so I just put it back on him. And the smart aleck didn't have any more to say because I had put him down, because truly the company was floundering because of terrible leadership. And within 6 months, I had it turned around because I changed the culture overnight. And just to make that point, one of the young women who was pretty high in the company came to me one day after I'd been there about 6 months, and she said this. She said, "Kerm, are you for real?" Now see, just think about it. She saw a side of this leader that she had never seen. This leader was worried about the heart, not about the leader getting the credit. And that's what happens too often. If the leader, the supposed leader, wants to take the credit before it goes to the people, then I'll guarantee you the culture will fail. Because a true leader doesn't think about him or herself. A true leader thinks about the people that are doing the job and can probably do it 10 times better than the supposed leader could ever do it. But that's not what a leader's for. A leader is there to create the culture. And within 6 months, I had that company turned around. And it was Steelcase and Hayworth, the two main competitors, were just licking their chops because they were counting the days before Herman Miller would be bankrupt. And within 6 months, we were taking the share back. And it's that simple, but it's that difficult. Because most people think that leadership means that they have to be the visible leader. That's not true. Too often, if the person in charge thinks they have to be visible, they're shutting off the creativity and everything that the people under them can bring forward. And if that's allowed to happen, then the culture changes. And it happened much faster than I thought it would, because I won't go into who was to blame, but a couple of generations of leaders had completely failed, supposed leaders, because they knew nothing about leadership. So at any rate, that's a great question, but it has really, the answer to it has nothing to do with how is a wonderfully designed piece of furniture by Herman Miller. What does that have to do with chemical engineering? It has nothing to do with chemical engineering, but it has everything to do with leadership.
How much of an organization's success is culture, and how much is sort of economy, external events, things like that that are outside of their control?
Well, I would say that there are certain things that can happen in a bad culture, but if there's one bump in the road, everything goes down. And that's what had happened at Herman Miller. The company was going out of business, pure and simple. And then when that culture changed, there were very good people in the company. And did they ever respond in a wonderful way. I would, if I could only choose between hard science and soft science and culture, then I would go with culture every time, because there's enough around to carry the hard science, I'll call it, the exactitude off. But if the culture's wrong, it kills everything. So you can't have just to go do everything according to the book and expect the organization to survive. It won't. It has to be done in an environment that's conducive to the heartstrings. You know, I would just summarize what I just heard you say that this person was experiencing. I would just ask you a question, and this is not for you, but just a general question. What price happiness? How much of your happiness in your life are you willing to give up to make money? If you have to give up any happiness, then I would rethink about the decisions that you're making. Because to me, life is not living if you're not happy with what life is dealing you and what you're making of life. So to me, there's no value that you can put on life without being satisfied with what's happening in your life. That may not speak to it, but that's what I glean out of what I was, and I couldn't hear exactly all of your conversation, but that's the way I would summarize it. Don't sell happiness short.
You received a degree from MIT after KU. How did the two compare? How would you say that KU compared with MIT, both academically and socially and culturally?
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, I was in a very rare atmosphere at MIT. I was one of 54 students from around the world that came together as Sloan Fellows. And so most of us had been sent there by our companies, and I was going there directly after spending 5 years in Europe. And I can tell you that the air was so rarefied at MIT, just not because it was any better than KU's, but it was so focused in terms of living the full life. And you know, there were 54 of us in the class, and we had cliques, obviously, like my best friend was from IBM. Another great friend was from Boeing, and a couple of others from different companies. But we bonded so well that with our spouses, we just created a new life, basically. And so I could never compare that experience, because it was in a way so structured, but yet so open, and there was nothing we had to do, but we could experience the best of everything, whether we'd go skiing in New Hampshire, or for the weekend together, or have a crazy party. I remember a party that we had at our house. I was renting a huge home in Weston, which is just west of Boston, and I'll never forget that party because there were so many things going on at one time, but it was so honest, and people weren't getting drunk or anything, but they were just enjoying everything that they were doing. And to me, I don't think I could have ever experienced that at KU, just because there wasn't the opportunity for that kind of a thing to happen. So it's a great question, but I really can't make the comparison between the two. I loved my time at KU. I absolutely felt that the time at MIT was priceless.
Our second question online is, if you were an undergraduate today, what branch of engineering would you go into and why? Or would you go into engineering at all?
Well, I suspect I would not go into engineering because, and that's hard to make that assessment when you're 83 and a half years old. And even thinking about going back to school gives me shudders. But I suspect there's no reason why I would, if I was going to do engineering, that I wouldn't have stuck with chemical engineering. Because, I feel that chemical engineering is so balanced in many ways that it leaves room for the heart to operate.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
I assume in your dealings with the Soviet Union and China, you have to be a good communicator. So what would you say is the most important or the secret to being a great communicator?
Well, probably the secret to being a great communicator is to not be afraid. So I never feared that I would be locked up. Somebody said to me once, when I came right out and told the people in China that, basically they were doing the wrong thing. And somebody said, "It's amazing that you weren't taken out and shot." I said, "That never entered my mind. I knew what needed to be said to them, and I said it." So be brave. Don't be reticent. Don't think. I'd say maybe to answer you with what I've already said, I'd say don't let your heart be taken over by your brain. Because your heart will lose every time if you give your left side of your brain too much room to take over. The right side of your brain won't have a chance. So you'll need to step out and take some chances. But I don't believe they're chances. As just I responded, what price happiness? There is no price on happiness. To me, I wouldn't sell my soul for any price. And that's basically, if you decide that, well, I've got to just stick with the script that I know and that I can write down and on a piece of paper, you're selling yourself short.
Our students are going to soon start looking for jobs, or maybe some are now. What are some of the cultural cues they should be looking for as they look at the company or interview or visit? Are there certain things that
Well, that's a great question, Harvin. I would say that unfortunately, you have to base a lot on the interviewer. And if the interviewer comes across as being very, I'll just call it grade point oriented, then I'd think twice about that company. Because that's not where the balance can come about that I'm talking about. If you're just focused on excelling as a chemical engineer or as a petroleum engineer or as a civil engineer or whatever, that's really not what we want to have happen.
Would you say that you became an entrepreneur to follow your passion, and is your passion culinary and wine, or why did you choose to kind of use
Yeah, I enjoy good wine, and living in Brussels, I was next door to some of the greatest vineyards in the world on the Rhine River and in France. And when we lived in Brussels. It was well before the earth started warming up. And so for instance, the year that we lived in Great Britain, in South Wales, to my knowledge, there was not one vineyard, and certainly no wineries in Great Britain, in the whole British Isles. Today, the British Isles are making as good a wine, if not better wine, than France, just because of the changes in the climate. Now, you can't really blame anybody for that. That's basically a fact. But what's happening now, we really have to think about the choices we make now. Because if you decide to go into the wine industry in southern Spain, you're probably going to be disappointed. It's too hot. If many parts, I would say 80, this is totally off the top of my head, I would say 80% of California is no longer viable for making wine because the nights are too hot. And when the nights are hot, here's a little bit of chemistry for you. When the nights are hot, the temperature stays too high for the acid to remain in the grape. And when the acid oxidizes and turns to sugar, then you've got not only the sugar that nature produced, which would maybe give you 12.5% alcohol in a fermented wine, but now you've got another 2 to 3% of alcohol that will be generated from the sugar that came from the oxidation of the acid. Now that doesn't work. I'm not very kind, and I describe that kind of wine as California wine because it's high in alcohol, too high, and it's low in taste, no taste. And there is no such thing as a tasteless wine. That's junk, because wine is all about the taste. So it's all about the acid, and it's all about getting through the summer nights.
So to what extent would you say mentor, like a good mentor, would play in like finding your passion?
I think a great mentor is priceless. It might be your mother, it might be your father, it might be anybody. And I wouldn't sell anybody short, because there are many, many people in your lives that are more concerned about your happiness than are concerned about your technical success, and especially close relatives, whether it's your mother or a favorite uncle or your grandparent, somebody you can rely on to be a wonderful mentor for you and to help you think seriously about what am I going to do now? Am I going to trade off happiness for an extra 10 grand a year? Horrible bargain. That's the devil's bargain. Yes?
I think there's a lot of, I'm a senior, so there's like a lot of pressure that I've been feeling, and like going into the job force or going to grad school next year and figuring out what I want to do. You talked a lot about like trying to find your passion. Is there any more like practical advice on how to like really find that when there is all of that pressure to like find what you want to do?
I think the answer to that is as varied as the number of people in the universe, because each person, and I'll sort of show my faith side that my KGB friend saw. I think our Creator can't be undersold. Our Creator knows exactly where your passion is, and there are people to help you find that. But I think if you are really thinking seriously, you can find it yourself. I wouldn't sell yourself short. But I just know that that doing what you love to do and what you've been trained to do will be made better if you develop the right brain as well as the left brain. I just know that's a fact. You might even get hired by Dow Corning to be a, which Dow Corning doesn't exist anymore because it was absorbed into Dow Chemical. But you might be very surprised where people will pick up on it when they see that you have the ability to speak extemporaneously, or the ability to meet with strangers and convince them that you want to listen to them. You don't want to tell them what to do. And listening is the most important art as far as I'm concerned. And using that right brain is the ability to listen. And don't sell that short. Yes?
Did you ever consider pursuing music?
Oh, no. And as a profession?
Yeah.
Well, no, because I could, but I sing in church choirs every Sunday. I sing whenever I can. I sing in chorales, community chorales and things. So I'm doing what I need to do to exercise my love. And, I'm not about that. In my mid-80s, I'm not about to start on a new career, and I don't need to. I've fortunately, in the wine business, which I love, and I'm making, I believe, some of the best wines in the world right now, not because of the perfection that my winemakers have, but they play a major part in it. But the main thing is that Northwest Michigan is one of the few places on the earth today that can keep acid through the night, because the vector where the southeasterly winds coming off from Wisconsin comes across 100 miles of open Lake Michigan water. Now the lake is only 80 miles wide, but at that vector it's 100 miles, and some of that water is 600 feet deep. And you know how much that water warms up during the summertime? Given a chance, maybe the top 5 or 6 feet, because there's so much cold underneath of it that keeps rising up. And, so that's, I'm very fortunate to have gotten into the wine business when I did. And I grow about 2/3 of the grapes myself. And then I have 3 growers that grow the rest of them for me, and I take all of their grapes. And so my head winemaker, can basically, and right now, today, he's out in the vineyards, and as not only mine, but in the vineyards that the other growers that are growing for me, he's basically telling them what needs to be done and when to pick the grapes and things. And so, you can manage all of that stuff. I don't do it personally, but I've got people that can. So I love the wine business, I love singing, and I'm not ready to give either one of them up.
Kerm, it's been a great hour. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it very much.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you all for coming and participating with us in our Career Accelerator Lecture Series.
And just keep up the great work. And keep this university loving you and loving this university, and leave room in your heart for love. Take care.
All right. Have a good evening.